And we are very pleased to have Dr. Terry Scott, who's been with us before. We've had some great feedback. And he is now with University of Louisville.
Just for now, anyway.
Just for now. And thank you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, welcome. How many of you have had to sit through a day with me before? Okay, I'm sorry. What I want to try to do in our day today is to kind of give you an overview of where we've been somewhat, and then move forward from there and give you some kind of practical ideas. And in each of the pieces, I want to show you some examples of things we're actually doing and kind of lead you through, this is what it could, would, might look like for you in your school. So I want to cover a few things going in. Then this afternoon, I'm going to very quickly summarize where we've been before with FBA, and then I'm going to kind of give it back to you to work through cases with your own kids, and I'm going to give you little blocks of time to think about it, then we're going to come back and discuss, and then I'm going to give it back to you to think about some things. We'll come back and discuss. So our afternoon is going to kind of be for you, case study kind of thing, and a chance to talk through some of the issues with FBA. As Sherry said, I am now at the University of Louisville. I don't know where I was last time you saw me. I've been everywhere. As soon as people ask me to do things, I decide it's time to leave and go somewhere else. So I don't know how long I'll be here, but actually they a bunch of former students of mine came in there to take over that program and redo it, and they asked me to come in and direct it, and it was just too good an opportunity to pass up. So that's why I've moved again. I'm going to show you at the end an email address and a website. The website is a place where you can go and get all the things I'm showing you. So forms, slides, checklists, all of those things are available to you for free. There is nothing for sale. So I know you don't have the handouts in front of you right now, and I apologize for that. The reason you don't is because I was not prepared in time to get them to Sherry. So they will go up on the web. I'm also going to give them to her, and she's going to be able to email them all to you. The point of me telling you all this is I don't want you to feel like you need to write down everything you're hearing today. It'll all be there for you. So just relax and sit back and do whatever. Okay. This is my review of where we've been, or it will be. Where we've been is this. Whenever we're talking about positive behavior support, which is the behavior end of something that is three-tiered, we're talking about discipline. And if we're going to talk about discipline, I always want to make sure that before we start a day of talking about discipline, that we all agree what discipline is or what it means. And I think of discipline, this is my favorite definition. Anything we do that makes kids more successful is discipline. So now I would just go to the literature, to the research, and I would say, what does the research say makes kids more successful? And it's a bunch of things that we do before kids get to us, and a bunch of things that we do after kids get to us. But we know these kinds of things. Good instruction is discipline. Consistency on our part is discipline. Feedback to kids immediately and consistently is discipline. You thinking out, what are the rules for my classroom? That's discipline. Everybody will probably have a different set of rules because everybody has a different classroom. So you have to think out, what would make my kids successful? Where would my kids need to be at this point in time in my classroom? What should they be doing? How should they do it? Those are all rules. So you think out ahead of time, what do I want my kids to do at 9, 10 a.m.? When we're doing independent work time in my classroom, my kids will be successful if they're doing what? Those are your rules. You have to have rules or there are no expectations. If there aren't rules, then nothing is right and nothing is wrong. When we teach reading or math or writing or social studies or anything else, there are rules. These letters together make this sound. That's a rule. It's right or it's wrong. When you see a plus sign, we add. That's a rule. It's right or it's wrong. There are conventions to everything we teach. Teaching is based on there are some rules. What we as teachers do is we say, how do we build an environment in which those rules are likely to be met with success from the kids? So, when I first started teaching, I had a room with 10 adjudicated adolescent boys in a lockdown facility. My rule was, line up in an orderly manner at the door when I say it's time to go somewhere. If my routine looks like this, oh my God, we're almost late for lunch, hurry, line up. They will never follow my rule. So I have to think out ahead of time. What does my routine have to be to get them to be successful so that I can say, good job, guys. What do I have to do? I have to do this. In my classroom, I had to say, we're almost ready for lunch. I'm looking for people that have their stuff put away and I'll have you line up. That's not because I have some power-hungry trip that I want to control when kids line up. I would rather just say go. But what do I have to do to make them be successful with the rule? Arrangements is the other thing we have to think about. What does the research say? Should your kids be sitting in rows, or in groups of 4, or in circles? The research says it depends. What do you want? If you say in your room, I want my kids to talk, discuss, then I would say, put them in circles. Put them in little groupings. If your rule is work independently and without talking, then I would say do not put them in circles, because that arrangement is not going to let your rule work. So when we do positive behavior support at the green zone, the school-wide level, what we're asking is, what do you want kids to do in the cafeteria, in the hallway, in the restroom, on the playground, at the lockers? Then what do we as a school have to have for routines and arrangements in those places that make it more likely they'll do that? As we start moving toward secondary, tertiary, kids for whom school-wide's not working, the rules really don't change. The routines and arrangements do. Let me take it back to an academic example. We put a really good reading program in place. We put a really good math program in place across all the kids. And we teach it really well. We're explicit, we give them lots of chances to practice, we give them lots of feedback, and there are some kids it doesn't work for. We don't go back in, if we've got one kid that still says 2 + 2 = 5, we don't go back in and change the rule and say, let's make it 5 so he can be right. Instead, we say, how could we do a different way of teaching and arranging? And maybe I'd move that kid to the front of the room where I could be on him more often to give him more intensive instruction. Maybe I'd change the routines a little bit so that we used more manipulatives. Or maybe I'd use peer tutoring. Or maybe I'd supplement with a different curriculum with that kid. In other words, I would do something different to my instructional arrangement to make the rule click for that kid. And we have to think about it the same way for behavior. When you have a kid that never sits down, that always yells out, that calls people names, that doesn't turn in their homework, we don't change the rule. We say, how do we, the adults, change what's going on to make it more likely that kid will follow the rule? Then we've got the other side. After we've used prevention and we look for behavior, then we have to look at what kids do. And everything we know about basic instruction says this. When you're teaching somebody a behavior that they haven't done before, when they try it, you must give them feedback every single time and as immediately as you can. Basic Pedagogy 101 says, instructional feedback is required immediately and consistently during acquisition learning. So, when we see kids following the rules or not following the rules, we must say yes or no. One variation of one of those two things. Let's take it to academics, because again, that's what people get. If we're talking academics and I say, what's 2 plus 2, and the kid says 4, what do? Do you hand that kid some sort of prize? Are we giving them boxes of candy for saying 4? No, we are saying, you are correct. You did it right. And we say it in a lot of ways. Good for you. Yes, correct. Great job. What we're really saying is, you did that one correctly. What about when we say, what's 2 plus 2, and they say 5? Do we hit them? Do we send them to the principal? We say, no, not 5. Let's try that again. Count these up. And they count them up and they say 4. And then we say, yes, so 2 plus 2 must equal 4. Great job. So what we do when they get it wrong is we correct them. We tell them it's not right, and we reteach. And when we reteach, we ask for performance. And when they perform, we give feedback. That's what we do. Now, we're talking here today about social behaviors, not academic behaviors. So, what do you do if you say the rule is walk in the hall and keep an inside voice? And you're the adult walking down the hall and there's kids walking in the hall and doing these things. What do you say? Do you need to give them a bag of candy or a prize? No, what you need to do is acknowledge them. That's it. Let them know they're doing it right. For some reason, people don't make this leap from, well, if they do it right with reading or math, I say, good job, you're right. But if they do it right with behavior, you get 2 things from people. You either get, we better give them some prizes, or I expect them to do that, so I'm not going to say anything. And when people say that to me, well, I expect that, I'd say, what do you expect them to do when you say 2 plus 2? So when they say 4, shouldn't you ignore them because they're only doing what you expect? It's not logical. It's instruction in both cases. And if it's instruction, feedback has to be there. So what we want people to understand is when you're doing anything in your classroom or with that particular kid that we might be talking about today, what do you want them to do? What have they been doing that's wrong? What do you want? There's your rule. What are you going to do to create a classroom environment in which routines and arrangements set that kid up to do it right? When they do it right, what will you do? When they do it wrong, what will you do? Those are the pieces of effective instruction for behavior. And this is what our data tells us. If you can create an instructional environment in which your kids are successful with whatever it is you've asked them to do, reading, math, sitting down, raising your hand, whatever. If you can get them to be successful 4 times more often than they fail, the research says they'll keep doing it when you're not there. And that's what we want. We want them to do it without us. If they can only do it when I'm standing there, then I don't think that really means very much. A kid who can only add and read when the teacher's standing there really doesn't have anything to use. They've got to do it without us. How do we create environments where kids do it right 4 times more often than they do it wrong? Clearly defined and explained rules, routines, and arrangements with good feedback every time they perform. What we know from the literature is kids that are successful, the kids we're not talking about today, if you were to watch them over time, the ratios for those kids in the school is something like 50 to 1. Of course they're going to keep doing it when you're not there. They're very successful at it. The biggest reinforcer we have is success. So every time a kid gets it right and we say, wow, good job, there's a huge reinforcer. Some people like to call it self-esteem, some people like to call it confidence, some people like to call it motivation, whatever you want to call it. It's whatever makes them want to keep doing it. And we know what makes you want to keep doing something is being good at it. So we have to force kids to be good. That's what teachers do. We set kids up to do it right. That's what teaching is. Now, what the research also says is that there are a group of kids out there who don't get 4 to 1. In fact, the research we have on kids with behavior problems in schools says the average kid with a behavior problem in a classroom spends their day at about 1 to 12. If you were a kid who had to go to school every day and fail 12 out of 13 things, how fun would school be? Let's make it be you. You have a job, and when you get to work every morning, your boss gives you 13 tasks. You fail 12 of them, your boss yells at you, your peers laugh at you, and let's throw this in. You aren't getting paid to be at this job in the first place. What would be your incentive, if that was you, to flip off your boss so that he told you to go home and watch TV? That's where our behavior kids are. Why shouldn't I just say, screw you, I get to go home, they'll suspend me. What have I lost? What am I missing? I'm missing a bunch of failures. Nobody wants failures, so missing failures is a good thing. So what we have to do then is we can't say it's up to the kid. That's something I don't like to hear. You don't hear people say that in academics. We don't have kids that aren't reading and people say, well, it's up to them. We say, well, then how could we teach it better? How could we have a better routine? How could we use different curriculum? How could we arrange the environment different? How could we use supplements? But we have kids that don't perform the behavior and we say it's up to them. Yeah, I get what people mean when they say that, but we can't think that way. It's up to us. If they don't do it, it's not our fault. It's our responsibility to try again. If they don't do it again, it's not our fault. It's our responsibility to try it again. What we have to do is to create an environment where this happens. How can you get a kid to do 4 right things when they don't do any right things now? You're going to have to trick them. Let's say you've got a kid who you've asked to come in and sit down every day. They've been here for 4 months, they've never sat down. All you want them to do is sit down once so that you can say, great job, and they'll go, hey, I'm good at this. But they won't even do it once. So we could just say, well, it's up to them. Or, how could you trick them into doing it just once? And here's the metaphor I want to use. Dig a hole in the classroom floor 6 feet wide and 6 feet deep. Put the chair at the bottom. Camouflage the top with leaves and twigs. Call the kid over, and when he falls in that hole, you run over to the edge and say, thanks for sitting down. There's your 1. Logically, that kid will never do it twice until they've done it once. So you have to get 1. Once you get 2, you can go for 3. But think about the logic. What's the probability of a kid doing it once if they've never done it? Not very good. If you were just to walk in randomly and look, it's probably close to 0. If a kid's done it 5 times, what's the probability of 6? Getting better. If a kid's done it 1,000 times, what's the probability they'll do it 1,001? Really good. So how do you get it to be a really good chance? You've got to make it happen a bunch of times first. And again, that is teaching. How do we get kids to be successful? So, when we start talking today about classrooms and individual kids and small groups, I want to use that same logic. What do we have to do to make it work for them? And one more thing I want to remind everybody of. When we say good job, that's only meaningful if they did a good job. Reinforcement is something that happens after behavior. So, that means walking around all day, throwing flowers at kids and saying you're all great and you're all beautiful, while not necessarily a bad thing, will not make this happen. You must first get them to do the behavior and then say, good job. Again, going around and saying, I love you, you're great, there's nothing wrong with that. But that won't make this happen. First, you've got to teach and get the behavior to occur, then. We want 4 times they did it right for every 1 time they did it wrong. So, going on to our by now annoying PBS triangle. We know that if we use good rules, routines, and arrangements across the school, 80% or more of your kids will do fine. In fact, our data says right now, from over 5,050 schools where we have data, that this is closer to 85, 86, 87% when we're doing PBS to fidelity. But we're still going to have a group of kids up here for whom it's not really working. And as we've talked before, I don't really think that what we have up here is a yellow zone and a red zone. I think we've got a bright yellow zone and a somewhat less bright yellow zone and a orangish yellow zone and an orange zone and an orangey darkish zone. I think there are unlimited variations. And what that means is, when we see a kid for whom it's not working, we should do the simplest thing possible to make it work. And if that doesn't work, we should do something a little bit different. And if that doesn't work, a little bit bigger. And if that doesn't work, and this logic, when tied to behavior, is called PBS. That exact same logic, when tied to reading, is called RTI, response to intervention. It's the exact same concept. For some reason, the government has decided to make RTI mean reading. It doesn't. It means reading, math, writing, whatever. Wherever a kid is not being successful, what do we need to do right now to make them successful? If that doesn't work, something bigger. How will we know when kids really need special ed? Because they are kids that did not respond to all the good things we do. And what we found is when you put RTI in place, we don't get as many kids in special ed because we get a lot of kids that can be remediated without it. But if all you do is wait and say, our model for special ed is you have to be this far behind. Well, if you wait long enough with doing nothing, everybody will eventually get that far behind. Some of them would be real special ed kids, and some are just kids that we forgot to teach. RTI says, don't forget to teach before we decide whether or not they're, and PBS says, don't forget to teach before we decide which kids need FBA. We do not want to do FBA on 1 million kids. And so today when we talk through yellow, orange, dark orange, I don't want to talk about FBA until we get to the end, because I think there are so many other things to do first that are simpler. Does that mean FBA is not a good thing? No, it means it's a complicated thing. So why use something complicated if we could do it without something complicated? That's why we're going to start simple. Here's the way we're going to lead through this. This is doing this to me today. All of the school-wide stuff is in place. We've done that. We've done it well. So your team in your school goes and looks at the data and says, here are a group of kids that it isn't working for. Somebody better take a look at them. So your school-wide team refers that to a team in your school that looks at individuals. In your school, maybe this is called the SST, Student Support Team. Or maybe you call it the TAT, Teacher Assistance Team. Or maybe you call it the what?
Or the I team.
The I team. Don't know what that means, but intervention team. Great. So you've got something in your school that's together to look at kids with problems. And here's the way I think we should be looking at it. When that team gets together and you say, here's a kid that's still having problems, the first question I would ask always is, does that kid have classroom management going on in their class? Because if that kid has no management, no rules, no routines, no arrangements, then I wouldn't want to go do FBA or any of these other complicated things until we first said, would it work if someone said don't? Because honestly, we do see those cases where it's happening over and over, and we say, have you told the kid not to? And they say, well, I just assumed they knew. Okay, well, we would really be wasting our time if we were doing an FBA on that. So first thing I'm going to ask is classroom management in place? Second thing I'm going to ask is, can this kid, or is this kid capable of doing the academic work you've given them? If you give a kid algebra and they can't add and subtract, they will not be successful. It's just not logical. So I want to know, can they do the work you're asking? In essence, when you think about that, we're really talking about function again. We're talking about maybe it's escape motivated. But I don't want to go down that complicated thing. It's more simple just to say, can they do the work? If not, then what could we give them that they could do? How do we make them successful? If algebra is down here, what could we give them that they could be successful with 4 times more often than they fail today? And then add to that, and add to that. But you aren't going to ever make them successful with algebra 4 times more often than they fail if they can't do these things. So where do we need to be today to make instruction be 4-to-1 at a minimum? If those kinds of things don't work, or if we say those aren't relevant, those things are in place, we don't need to change them, then the next thing I would ask is there something we could do school-wide with this kid, but with small groups? So what I'm going to talk about today are a couple of these things. One's called check-in, check-out, which I'll describe to you. It's something the whole school does for a subgroup of kids. Very small amount of time involved, real simple, but some kids it really, really works for. The other one I want to talk about a little bit today is the social skills. How do we teach social skills to a small group of kids? If you find that there are 10 kids in your school that don't know how to do this particular thing and it's causing them problems, the simplest thing to do would be to get those 10 kids together and teach them how to do that. If we say these small group things didn't work, then I think we're ready to move on to FBA. But when we move on to FBA, I would make that first level of FBA as simple as it could possibly be. It might be as simple as you handing out a checklist to teachers saying, what happens after they do this? What happens when they make the check marks? And you look at it and say, then I would try this. You're starting to think about function more specifically, but how simply could you talk about it? If that's not enough, then you go up and you get more people involved. At some point, you're sitting around a table with a team talking about one kid. If that doesn't work, you involve more people. At some point, we're doing a wraparound plan. But let's not do a wraparound plan on every kid that enters this triangle, the second part of the triangle. Let's save the wrap for up here. Let's think of wrap as special ed for reading. We would like to say that we got wrap there if we need it, but let's hope we don't. Just like special ed for reading. There has to be special ed for reading there if we need it, but let's hope we don't. You will. But let's hope it's a really small number of kids because these other things have worked. And that's the way I want wraparound to be. I want wraparound to be something that is so intense that we really can't apply it to a bunch of kids. It's got to be sufficient to work. So let's apply it to the kids that really need it and do it big. Or we could do wrap kind of halfway amongst a bigger group of kids. And what we know is when you just do it kind of halfway, it's not going to work very well. So let's only do it the way it works with the amount of kids we can afford. So one of the things you're going to have that's on my website, and it's actually an Illinois thing, is are you ready to do secondary, tertiary stuff? And here's what we have to get schools to understand. If you aren't doing any prevention across the school, you don't have time to do secondary, tertiary. You can't put half of your school in check-in, check-out. You don't want to. If every teacher in your school is not using classroom management, you're going to get blown out of the water. So you've got to think, do we have rules, routines, and arrangements in place across the school? Are we collecting data to see where it's working and where it's not? Those are the pieces that have to be there first. So if we were to go across here like this is what I want to do today. I want to spend the first part of our morning talking about these things, really hitting on classroom management. If you've got a teacher that you believe needs some issues with management, what are the things that we can give them that are really simple? It's not easy to go into a classroom of a teacher and say, you need to do this, 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 and this. Because they're likely to say, go away. And they're not going to do any of them. So how do we trick adults into doing things that trick kids into being successful? That's a lot of what we do as coaches. Or, George the guy calls it positive nag. It's a set of tricks. How do we trick people into doing these things? That's what we need to do, because if they don't do the right things, the kids won't be successful either. So I'm going to spend some time this morning talking about this. I want to show you check-in, check-out. I'll show you how it's done. I'll show you some graphs. I'll show you lay it all out for you piece by piece. We'll talk about the social skills part. And then after lunch, we're going to talk about the basic FBA process at the simple end with a kid you think about. And when you think about a kid that you've got this afternoon, I also want you to go back and ask these questions, though. Does that kid have the rules, routines, and arrangements necessary to be successful in their classroom already? If they don't, then we need to get that established before we can go any further. Is there something really simple we could do with that kid on small groups, before we move into that? So let's not think of FBA as our first thing that we do. In order to make this work, there are some things that we've begun to believe need to be there, or it isn't going to happen. One is, we believe the school district has to support what we're doing. They do that by having a PBS team at the district that says, what do we do to help our school? And they establish things like coaches, things like what you're doing. So that could be even at the state level or a regional level or something, but there's something up above the school that says, how do we coordinate the assistance? So you guys have got that going. At the school level, there must be an administrative support and school-wide PBS. If you don't have school-wide PBS, then the yellow-red zone stuff we're talking about today will not work very well because it'll be overwhelmed. We must prevent first and use this on the kids for whom prevention didn't work. Third level, at the individual level, we must have that team, the I-team, the TAT, the SST, the IPBS, whatever those people call it. You must have a team whose job it is to look at these kids and say, what's the simplest thing we could do? Those structures have to be in place. If none of those things work, if you do all those things and nothing works, then we can call in the experts. And when we've called in behavior analysts and medical and mental health professionals and nutritionists and family counselors and all those people, now we're starting to look like wraparound. We want those people available. They are going to be a part of some of our plans. They are a part of the plans that we can't do in the school alone. How will we know which kids can't do it in the school alone? We've tried. And that's what we have to demonstrate. That's the RTI logic. You must demonstrate that there was no response to simpler interventions before we go to bigger interventions. So let's start with the classroom stuff. There's a really simple literature on the classroom stuff that dates back to the 50s. And the foundations of that date back even way before. There's a website that I should write on here, and I have it. NWREL.org. That stands for Northwest Regional Education Laboratory. What they've done is they've gone in and they've looked at all the research that's ever been done. And they've put it in little sections and they summarize it all on that website, and there are literally thousands of references. And one of the sections they have is classrooms. And so what they did was they said, let's look at classrooms that are successful. And much of this work was done by some names that you may recognize that are probably older and even retired now, Brophy and Good, David Berliner, people that looked at classroom variable stuff way back when. And what they said was, what do classrooms that have these things in common? Very low incidence of problem behaviors. You just don't see problem behaviors in these classes. That kids, if you look at academics, are successful at 80%. 80% was what they said years ago. And what is 80% in terms of a ratio? 4 to 1. They're saying, how do we get academic rates of 80% or better? And these are classrooms where, at any given time, if you walk down the hall and open the door, surprise, and look in there, the kids are probably engaged in something. Not wandering around wondering what to do next, not transitioning, but engaged in something. what are the teachers in these classrooms doing more than other teachers do? And what the NWREL database literature summarized says is there are some very specific things that we know these teachers do. One, they are thoughtful. They plan ahead of time. They've thought out ahead of time, what do I have to do in class today to make my kids be successful with that? In other words, I like to think they've thought out what kinds of routines and arrangements are going to have to be here to make sure the rules work. And they tell the kids, hey, here's what we're doing today, and here's why we're doing it. And then they model it for them and all these other pieces that I'm going to show you next, but they're very, very vocal with the kids right up front. Here's what the expectations will be, or here's what the rules are. So they think it out ahead of time, plan it out ahead of time, and tell the kids. When I used to have student teachers that I supervised, one of the things I made sure they always did when I went to look at them was, I want you to start every lesson by telling the kids why we're doing this. And here are things that I don't want to hear. Because I said so. Because that's the next page in the book. Because that's what the school board says we have to do. Those aren't reasons kids care about. No, we're doing this because you will be able to do these things that are neat, that'll help you if we get this done. It's about the kids. So good teachers make these things real for the kids. Then there are a set of behaviors that the teachers use. One, they tell the kids what we're going to do during the day today. Today we're going to do these things. Now, I always had to do that with my kids. In fact, I had to have it on the board. From 10 to 10:13, we will do these pages. Because my kids, my behavior disordered kids, would not sit still for 3 seconds if they didn't know what was coming next. If I didn't do that all day long, they'd be saying, what are we doing next? How much more of this? But if I make sure it's there, they know what's coming. Good teachers, even in the gifted classrooms, specify, here's what we're going to do today, here's how long it will take, here's how you'll know when we're done. Good teachers in these classrooms that are really successful demonstrate everything. Once they say, here's what we're going to do, they immediately say, here's what it looks like, watch me. They show them. And they talk while they're showing. Notice that I did it this way. Why didn't I do it this way? How come I should do it like this? Watch what this hand is doing. They are very, very explicit when they talk about it. Watch, see, look, learn. And then they make sure that they move that quickly into kids getting a chance. The pacing doesn't allow for kids to find something else to do. Again, something for me who learned to be a BD teacher by being thrown into a BD room, I learned that if you have downtime where you're trying to figure out what to do next, the kids won't wait. They'll go on to their own activity. And 9 times out of 10, it will be something I wish they weren't doing. So, let's keep thinking ahead. What's next? How do we keep them engaged? Don't let them have downtime. Questioning probably comes out in this literature bigger than everything else. And it says these teachers are questioning constantly. But it's not like they're asking really complicated questions. What they're really doing is engaging kids. The question could be, what color is this? What's the date today? But they're just constantly keeping questions going back and forth, which does several things. One, it makes the kids look at you because you're constantly pointing at them and asking things. So it engages kids. 2, if you're asking the right questions, you can create your success to failure ratios early in the day. You know, if I ask the right questions and say, yeah, thanks, great, what I'm doing is setting you up by giving you lots of chances to be successful. There is something we know of in behavior called behavior momentum. And if you look at the research on behavior momentum, what it says is, if you can get a kid to comply with 2 or 3 really simple tasks, they are far more likely to comply with a complicated task next. So if I see you first thing in the morning, and I walk in and I say, do this math project. She doesn't want to, she probably won't. But statistically, If I were to say to her, where'd you get this thing here? Where'd you get this?
Oh, it's Christmas present.
Oh, this is really cool. Thanks. And hey, would you mind going and getting that eraser from the back part and bringing it up to me? Thanks so much. And hey, could you show me this thing? I get 2 or 3 of those things in, and then I say, hey, let's get started on that math project. That doesn't mean for sure she's going to do it, but the odds have increased because of a principle called behavior momentum. Can you get the kids engaged with answering you on things they want to answer and are happy about and simple with early? And this is something early childhood people do really well. They go to the calendar, they talk about kids and what's the date and what did you have for dinner last night and blah, blah, blah. But then we kind of get rid of that stuff as they get older. You should. You're not going to want to ask your high school kids, what did you have for dinner last night and what's the sunshine look like today? But there are things you can ask those kids. And if nothing else, you could boil this down to that literature on relationship building, which says when teachers and students talk back and forth in a mutually reinforcing way, it's more likely that kids will engage in the activities. So questioning to me is, it's a trick. How can you get kids to engage with you positively all the time? Talk to them. That's how. The more questions you ask, the better. And the last thing that questioning can do is if you ask the right questions, it can also assess, are they with me? Do I need to reteach or can I go on? So questioning is gigantic. Prompting. Good teachers are prompting kids all day long. It's not something extra. It's amazing the subtleties of a good teacher prompt. A good teacher can raise one eyebrow and make the entire class do something. One hand up to their face, this, something, tells kids what to do. Good teachers are masterful at getting kids to do things with simple things like that. But the other things good teachers do is they remind. We're getting ready to go in the hall. How should we go down the hall if we're doing it right? Those little reminders right before we do something are gigantic in terms of trapping kids doing it right. I really want to say good job in the hall today for walking. I really want to say it. I think I need 4 to 1 out there and we're not getting it. How can I make sure they walk today so I can say thanks, good job? Prompt them right before you go out there. We're just getting ready to go in the hall, so stop. What should we be doing in the hall? How should we be going? Walking or running? Walking. Let's see if we can see it. Now you go down there with them and say, wow, great job walking. You trapped it with your prompting. And that's all these things are doing. They're traps. They're that hole in the floor. They're that thing we use to make the kid be tricked into doing it right so that we can give the reinforcer. Because remember, you can't give the reinforcer until they behave. Good teachers use lots of appropriate feedback, which we'll define as specific praise. You are good at that. That was a good job with that. Thank you very much. I like the way that happened. You were really doing a good job with that. Telling kids what they did right, and correction. Here's why that's not right. What would be a better way? Engage with them, teach, get them to demonstrate with feedback. The one thing we don't see in these classrooms is criticism. Lots of correction, but not criticism. It's not about you're a bad person, it's about you did that wrong. This is something that I think as kids get older, people have more difficulty not using. I know for myself personally, I really struggle with this one when I'm with the adolescent delinquent boys who have the smart remark to say to me for everything, and I've got the perfect one to come back at them with to cut them right off at the knees. And when I use it, I've proven one thing. I am this much wittier than a 15-year-old delinquent. I'm hoping I don't need to prove that. Second, when I give my witty comeback, all it does is set the occasion for them to come back with something that's not so witty, but that's really negative, which usually needs a consequence. So in one respect, I've trapped them into doing something wrong. Whereas if I just corrected it and walked away, there would not have been another failure there. So what can we do to trap success and not trap failure? The criticism, the anger, the disgust, the emotion that we put into it is generally a trap in the wrong direction. So when we go look at classrooms, we want to say, are we trapping good things and not bad things, because it's just as easy to trap a bad thing. You see teachers arguing with kids and you think all they're doing is perpetuating this argument. It's a trap. You're trapping negative behavior. How do you stop it? That's what we have to get people to think about. Now, the hard part really is that second thing, getting people to change it. If I come to you and say, I've got a kid with a problem, and you say, I'd like to watch your classroom. And then you go to that person and say, you know why that kid has problems? Because you suck as a teacher. They are not going to do anything you ask them to do. So, how can you say that better? What we want to be able to do is say, I always would begin being empathetic. I don't care how bad it was. I would begin by saying, boy, I can understand why you're frustrated, because kids like that can really be frustrating. I've had kids like that in the past, and here's some things that I've tried that sometimes work. Then I say, what I really wanted to say was, you really need to do this. But I don't say it that way. I say, here are some things I've tried, and then I give them at least a couple of things. Because if you only give them one, you're going to hear, I've tried that, or that wouldn't work. So what you do is you give them 2 or 3, and you still might hear, I've tried all those. Well, maybe I should come in and try it a couple times and see what would happen if I did. Modeling. If you're not going to get the behavior you want from that teacher by just saying it, then you're going to have to model it. Because it's hard to argue. If you go in and do it and it works, it's hard for them to say it won't work. So I wouldn't start with modeling, but if they refuse to even try, then we might need to go there. Then I would get them to do it, work along with them, and try to make some of these things work. Remember, we want to get away from bad instruction. So this says Miss Bent's like to go over a few of her rules on the first day of school. And what Miss Bent's has done is she's laid out everything we should never do. The problem is, though, it can't possibly be everything, which means there are some things, if it's not on that list, it's okay, which is not going to be the case. And I'll tell you what, any of your kids that would generally gravitate to being in the red zone are kids that will love this list, because it's their goal in life to find things that are not on your list. And they will always find something that's not on your list. So one of the first things I ask when I go into the classroom is, what's the rule for that? Got this kid that's standing up all the time, running around. What's the classroom rule? Well, we don't have a classroom rule, but I want that kid to sit down. Okay, well, if there isn't a rule, that's like to me coming in, this kid's getting the math problem wrong all the time. What's the right answer? Well, there isn't a right answer, but he won't get the wrong answer. He keeps getting the wrong answer. It doesn't make sense. You can't have a wrong behavior unless you have an expectation. And yet we see it all the time. Kid's not doing the right thing. What's the rule? Well, there isn't one. But we expect that he knows basically what to do. Don't expect it. Teach it. So make sure that the rules are there before we start talking about how do you get him to do the rule. You can't say how do you get him to do the rule if we don't have a rule yet. Here's a good example, I think. No, that's not a good. This is a good example. This is a school that wanted all their kids to be respectful with one another and with teachers. And so we asked them, what's the rule? And they said, be respectful. And we said, but what should kids do? And then they went to the kind of another big idea. They should treat other people the way they want them to treat us. That's still a big idea. What do you want those kids to do if you're saying they're respectful? And they finally made this teachable. When you're being respectful to other people, it's what you say, you're using nice words and actions, it's how you say it, pleasant tone and volume, and it's what you look like, calm and interested. So you'd have to think out for the kids in your classroom or your school. What do you want them to do? And then teach them. What do those things look like? So that if a kid is saying the right thing and doing it appropriately, but they're doing it while they're getting ready to punch someone, that's not respectful. And so they want to be able to say to kids, I like the way you're doing this, I like the way you're doing that, but it's not respectful because what's missing? Here's the correction. That's right. What would be a better way? Show me that way. Now that's respectful. So the correction comes in. When you know what the rule is, you can correct it. If you don't have a rule, then correction gets really hard. And if you can't correct very easy, then what do people do? Punish. Hey, the kid did it wrong. What do I say? Here's what was wrong. It's just wrong. Punish him. But if it's a skill where there's a rule, we can say, what was not right? What should you do instead? Show me how. So if you don't have a rule, it's going to be really hard to use the management pieces. Must get teachers to have rules. Quickly again hitting on the prompts. How big should a prompt be? What's the smallest thing you could possibly use to get kids to do what you want? Yeah, I could have something gigantic. I could have a monster jump out of the wall when I want them to do something. Or I could say, raise my hand and wait for everybody to see me. What's the simplest? What's the simplest thing you could possibly do? Good teachers use those simple gestures a lot. Do these things, and over the year they use them less and less because they don't need them as much. So think about, once kids get good at it, let them know they're doing it right. Remember, once they know they're doing it right, they'll do it without us, which means we don't need the prompts anymore. So we use the prompts as a trap to build 4 to 1, and then we gradually fade the prompts and they keep doing it because they've got 4 to 1. We'd like to use those prompts ahead of time rather than as a correction. I want to show you a couple of simple things. A couple of simple things going on in a classroom where kids are misbehaving. In this one, they're talking. And I'm playing the role of the teacher in this one, and I'm probably not doing a very good job. So what I want to do is I want to show you this video, so you've observed me in the classroom, and then I'm going to come and tell you what I think is wrong. And I want you to think out, what are the kinds of things you would suggest to me, and how would you do that without calling me names or threatening me or anything? So watch this.
Hey guys, no talking, okay? I don't want any more talking. So we were up there, it sounded like. Guys, I said no talking. Just do something.
I've got these 3 kids in my class. They cannot stop talking. They've got some neurological problem, I believe. They should be in special ed. They need to be out of my classroom. And you just observe this and you're saying, remember, not, what kind of an idiot are you? There's nothing wrong with those kids, but you're saying, yeah, those kind of kids, I know what you're talking about. It can really take its toll on you. I've had that. Here are some things I've tried. Now here's what I ask. What would be the simplest possible thing you could suggest to this teacher?
One of the things is to rearrange the desk, maybe not the first thing.
Okay, I would say it's the first thing. They're sitting 6 inches apart. What's the arrangement for not talking? You know, my rule is no talking. My arrangement, I want you to sit as close together as humanly possible. Why? It doesn't make sense. Yes, the first thing I would say is, yeah, when I've had kids like that, I've tried to assign them to sit in areas to do work where they're not right next to each other. What could be simpler than that? It's not a behavior management, it's a move the kids around. But there are other things that I did as the teacher that weren't very good. Well, how could you give me some suggestions for other things?
I would still go with the prevention thing too. It's just before, you know, this is already happened. So the next thing, kind of teach what, you know, what we're gonna do here.
Right.
What we're gonna, well, instead of telling what we don't want them to do, start talking about, you know, the goal setting. And
Right.
just letting them know what they can do.
There are kind of 2 issues here. One is telling them what to do. And I never did. I kept saying, get busy, and then came back and said, do something. The second issue is, I should say that before they start talking, not waiting until after they do. If I wait until after they've started talking, I'm only using management as a negative. I will only talk to you when you do the wrong thing. Maybe you've had a boss like that before. If you don't hear from me, then everything's okay. I'm only going to talk to you if I hate you. So,
Another thing is proximity control being closer.
and proximity is giant. And one of the mistakes that I made in here was I keep coming in, saying something, and then leaving immediately without seeing if anything different happens. When you're going to give a direction, give the direction and then wait for it to happen. I'm gone, and they never have to follow through.
You didn't really give a direction.
I didn't give a direction, you're right. So, but I come in, I want something. I'm not sure what it is, but I come in and I say, do something, but then I don't facilitate that. It would be like, here's your math lesson today. Always do this. Okay, no one would say, wow, there's a good math teacher. But that's what I'm doing for teaching behavior. And I'm not being explicit at all. So we've got several things here. We could move these kids. So, yeah, I empathize with you. I've had these kind of kids, and yeah, they can really take their toll. Here's some things I've tried. Sometimes I'll try to have them sit apart, or I'll give them all something really specific to do in different places of the class. And a lot of times, too, what I'll do is I'll make sure they know right before they have a chance to talk, and I'll go over there and I'll kind of stand there until they do what I want, and I'll tell them real specific, So I'm giving a whole bunch of possibilities. Once I've said all those things, it's hard for someone to say, oh, none of that'll work. Although some people will. But here's what we were hoping we might see. So here's what I could model. This is what it might look like if we modeled it.
Hey guys, what are we supposed to be doing right now? Anybody know? Work. Right. Tommy, where's your work? Okay, would you go get that, please? Thank you. Let's go over here. I've got something I want you to do. And you get your work down below there, right? Get your book out. Good job. Okay.
Here's another one. What we have here is a kid that's off task. And I'm going to come to you and complain about this kid that's been referred a lot of times because of being so off task. So you observe, and this is what you observe in the classroom.
Hey, Tim, I need you to get busy with something. No, Tim, really, what are you going to do?
I've got this kid in my class, obviously ADHD. I think we need to med this kid up big time right now. And you say, I know those ADHD kids, and it doesn't matter whether he is or isn't. I know those ADHD kids can be really challenging. I found that the meds thing, it takes a long time to get that going. Here's some things that I've tried that sometimes are real helpful with kids like that. And you'd say, what? Okay, one, yeah, with those ADHD kids, you really have to be very specific about what you want them to do, because if it's general, they'll wander off again. So you have to really be specific. And really, that's for everybody, but we'll pretend like this is just for these ADHD kids. What else? Follow through again. Yeah. He says, I'll go do this. Great. Teacher walks away. He never makes it. And now we're back where we were again. So once we've decided something needs to be done, follow through to get that done. What about a kid who really doesn't like to do things? What's a good strategy for kids that just really don't want to do things?
Engage them in a preferred activity first.
Okay, we could, one, use a behavior momentum. Get them going with something simple. Hey, let's do this. You're going to do that, and it's something you want. Hey, could you do this? And then move our way in. Or we could offer a choice, which is also really two choices. Pick one. Here's what I got. You can do this, or, totally up to you, do this. Totally up to you. Which one would you like to do? And if they say, I want to go do this other thing, but that's not one of the choices. This one or this one, you choose. I'm going to leave it completely up to you. If you look at the research on choice making, it's actually funny, I think, to read these research articles. They had these kids, the one that I'm thinking of that amused me, they had these kids, I think they were 4th grade, And they were doing math worksheets every day. And the kids did not like the math worksheets, and they argued and they complained and they didn't get them done. So what they did was they took the math worksheet and they jumbled the problems up, same exact problems onto 3 different pages, and made them different colors. And they went to the kids and said, we know you don't like the math worksheet, so what we did is we decided to have 3 different kinds, and you don't have to do the ones you don't want to do, you get to pick the one you want. And these kids completely stopped complaining and their math progress went way up. It's the same stuff, but there's this perception of having a choice that makes a difference. So the choices don't even have to be a big deal, it's just that there is a choice. So how can we offer that? Now on this one, the teacher does not follow through the way I think they should have when we tape this. I think, like you're saying, the teacher should have followed this kid all the way back. Teacher kind of watches him go to the desk and then leaves. I would go all the way to the desk and make sure that he's actually pulled out the pencil and doing the things rather than just moving in that direction.
Hey Tim, I'm going to need you to make a choice. You can either take one of those pencils and sit down here and do some of the same work that they're doing, or you can go over to the table and work on the projects over there. So what is it going to be? All right, you got your pencil, you're ready to go? It's a good choice. Thanks for making it.
So at the end there, again, I think teachers should have followed a little longer. But these are the kind of simple things we're talking about. So when we say classroom management, we talk about that first bar there, moving along this continuum. We aren't talking about really complicated using differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors. We're not talking about using these great big management systems. We're talking about basic classroom management. If the teachers aren't able to do those things, then even the FBA stuff isn't going to work because basic management's not there. It can't work. So first we have to make sure. One other thing that we've got that I like to use, I used a lot in my classrooms, is called a group contingency, which puts the contingency on everybody. This is particularly good for things where kids are interacting for problem behaviors. So if you've got a group of kids that loves to laugh at one kid who goofs around, so one kid can jump on their desk and make a noise and do a dance and everybody laughs. It's really hard to control the amount of reinforcement that kid's getting from their peers. So we say this: if we don't see anybody up on their desk goofing around and we don't hear anybody laughing at inappropriate behavior today, we all get some extra recess. Now what you've done is you've just taken the incentive away from that kid to get up and for everybody else to laugh. And that kid does get up, we take away the reinforcer for it. If we're reminding kids ahead of time, what are you going to do if? That would be a group contingency. Always do your group contingency on the entire group. We all must do it to make it happen. Do not do group contingencies on, if Brenda does it right, we all get. 2 problems with that. 1, it sets Brenda up to kill everybody. Ha ha, I'm going to get you all. 2, if Brenda screws up, it makes everybody hate her. So we want the whole group. Here are the keys to group contingency. Make very clear to kids what it is you want them to do and teach them. Everybody has to be able to do it. Group contingencies are not used for teaching new behaviors. They're used for getting kids to do things you know they already can do, but they're not doing. So if there's one kid in here that can't do it, everybody gets punished. So if I said right now, I will give $1 million to each of you if you can all solve a calculus problem. If there's one person in here that can't do it, you've punished everybody in the room. So make sure that they can all do it before you get started. Second, think about kids like Brenda who are going to want to screw it up for everybody. If there's one kid in your room that's going to stand up and say, I'm going to ruin it for all of you, this won't work and don't try it. If you do put it in place and you think it's going to work and then that happens for Brenda, then what you do immediately is you say, this is not for you, this is for everyone else, Brenda. Take the wind out of her sails. So it's still on, she can't get the negative attention. And then before you ever try to use this again, have a one-on-one with Brenda and say, here's the way that's going to work. But if you've got kids, a lot of kids in your room that you think would love to think they could get a negative attention from everybody by screwing it up, don't do a group contingency. It can backfire. In my room, what I used to do is kids would argue constantly and drove me nuts when I was working in the self-contained BD room in the lockdown place. And what would happen is I would go so insane of trying to put out these arguments that I decided I'm going to let them police themselves. So I put this circle on the board, and their favorite activity was softball. So I said, I'm going to start making marks in that circle. When we get to 30, we'll go play softball again. So it's up to you when we get to 30. Here's what you need to do to get marks. Every 10 to 15 minutes, if there haven't been any arguments, I'm going to put a mark. If there's an argument, here's the way you should solve it. And then I taught them how to do a basic little simple conflict management. If you two disagree on this, here's the way you lay it out. And I put the rules up on the board. Now what used to happen is these two would have some simple little conflict and everybody else would take sides and say, hit him, and push them together. Once we got this going, what started happening is there'd be a little argument and I wouldn't say anything about it. I would just say, man, it might be a long time before we play softball again. And I would just walk by and say that, but not put a mark on the board. And then you'd hear kids going, figure it out, man, figure it out. And they do this thing, and then I walk by and go, that was really good the way we had conflict management in that last one. I'd put a thing. And when they get to 30, we'd go play. But it took me out of the loop. I don't want to argue with you guys about not arguing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, here's what you do instead. It's up to you. So the contingency's on the group. I knew something the whole group really wanted to do. I think what we should do here is stop and take a break. Yes?
What's the HC?
Homework club. HC down here is homework club. There are a whole bunch of other kinds, similar kinds of small group things. Why don't we take a break? When we come back after the break, I want to hit on check-in, check-out, and social skills training and show you some examples of those. 10-minute break.